Good morning, everyone. It's Peter White talking. So welcome all to the workshop that starts today and concludes tomorrow afternoon. And today's theme is vocation as a pedagogical and advising tool through lens and practice. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to talk about how we arrived here for everyone that's visiting us today. So over a year ago, we started a project to reimagine the liberal education program at Colby-Sawyer. And the liberal education program still has the core components that it's the traditional liberal arts disciplines, but we reimagined it such that the first year experience would start to integrate concepts of vocation, and that would be framed around large, intractable, complicated problems modeled after the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. So nearly 20 of those SDG goals were used as the context for the first year experience course, or FYE. And as part of that change in the liberal education, we've made a purposeful way to include vocation in the curriculum. So it would start with the first year experience, but then we hope it's infused throughout our curriculum across the entire 4 years of the Colby-Sawyer education. So with that context, we've begun to implement those courses over the last several months through our academic proposals committee, and now they're going to be offered this fall for the first time. Back in January, Dr. Darby visited the college to talk to us about vocation and how it's used in a secular sense. So not just a religious calling or a technical calling, but to find one's purpose and passion in their work. And we see that today's students are concerned about these large, complex, intractable problems. They're concerned with issues like social justice and equity and diversity and inclusiveness. So those are the themes that are going to persist throughout our new liberal education model in the FYE course design: vocation, wellness, purpose, passion. And we're going to use the context of those SDGs presented by the United Nations as the theme to get the students involved in some of those larger issues. So it's quite an ambitious change in our liberal education program as we welcome over 250 new students to campus this fall. So we're excited to start this part of the liberal education process. The core classes remain largely the same in our liberal education model. They're framed a little bit differently and focus more on skills, but they still come from the traditional 6 disciplines of the liberal education program. As the students approach their junior year, they're going to be taking another course called Integrative Experience. This course is designed to help students reach out and try to solve problems at a local or regional level with community-engaged partners helping drive that curriculum or drive that project. So for short, we call that CEL, Community Engaged Learning. So hopefully the foundations presented in the FYE course in their core classes during the first couple of years set the foundation for those students to be successful in community engaged learning as juniors and then throughout the rest of their lifelong learning experience at Colby-Sawyer. The internship and capstone processes of our liberal education remain largely the same. So the biggest differences are the vocation aspect that's infused in the FYE and the CEL that's infused in the IE, which are roughly matched to the first and third year of a typical Colby-Sawyer education. So we've begun the vocation aspect back in January when Darby visited us, and we started to learn more about vocation. And now it's time for us to take that to the next level and develop more courses that include vocation, not just in FYE, but throughout our curriculum that call towards purpose and passion for our students. Secondly, and this will be more of the focus on tomorrow's workshop, is to start having successful relationships with community partners to drive the CEL curriculum that we proposed as a faculty last year. So that's the context of why we're here today. And I'm thrilled that Darby was able to join us again after we invited her back this summer and could make it work. Although the format, of course, is what we're all used to these days. So here we are looking at the Hollywood squares, as Darby would say, and she's going to lead us through vocation in a nutshell to start us off this morning. So Darby is a longtime educator and faculty member, and she's going to take it over for the next few minutes here. Darby, welcome.
Wonderful. Good morning, everybody. It is great to be back with the Colby-Sawyer community. Many of us were together last January. I see a lot of familiar faces. When I was able to present some thoughts about both vocation and community engaged learning, our topics for today and tomorrow. The idea back then was to try to create some shared understandings and to generate some excitement about what might be possible if you and your colleagues were to center both vocation and community engaged learning in your teaching and advising practices. So I'm just delighted to be back again and to journey alongside you as you move forward with that centering of those two things. Now, obviously, a lot has happened in the world since last January. And many things that seemed important or even urgent at that time have been eclipsed or reinterpreted by the dual pandemics that we're all living through, and I trust trying to address with courage and integrity and creativity. I believe that the times we live in underscore the need for precisely the kind of liberally educated, politically activated, and socially engaged global citizens that a Colby-Sawyer education is designed to develop. And more than that, I believe that vocation and community engaged learning are curricular and co-curricular organizing principles that can animate and catalyze that development. So I'm thrilled to be here and to journey deeper into this territory with you. So today, as Peter mentioned, our focus is vocation. And my task in the next few minutes is to try to lay down a basic conceptual framework for vocation as an organizing principle of the undergraduate experience, and to provide some examples of what those concepts can look like in practice, and then to invite you into conversation about what I put on the table, and then to invite you to actually get some work done. So after I do some presenting, we're going to break into small groups, and I'm going to ask you to process in those small groups what you've heard from me, and to identify at least one idea or practice that sparks your interest or imagination. So as I'm speaking, think about the fact that you're going to be put on the spot with your group of 4 in a Zoom breakout room to do some processing, but also to at least lift up one thing. And it could be one thing that I explicitly put on the table, or it could be one thing that emerges for you in response to what I put on the table. So maybe it's something I get wrong or that I miss. So I'm not suggesting that everything's going to come from me by any stretch of the imagination. After those small group conversations, you're going to have some workshop time. You actually have 45 minutes, during which I am hoping you will not check in at home or do your email or anything else, although you might run to the bathroom. But this is going to be a time we have worked hard to carve out some workshop time where your job is just to take those 45 minutes and give that one spark, that at least that one thing that you thought, this is something worth working more on, or this is something I've been meaning to get some time to work on in the sphere of vocation. So we're going to give you time to give that spark some oxygen and see where it might take you in terms of your own teaching or advising this year. And the idea in that workshop time is to get you get you some momentum, get you working in a planful way so that you don't leave today's session thinking, oh, that was cool, learned some things, maybe I'll return to a few of my notes And then of course you never do if you're anything like me. I go to a million of these things and just things have a way, even when they're inspiring, of going on the shelf. So those 45 minutes of workshop time are designed to help you make sure that this doesn't go on the shelf, because it's important for Colby-Sawyer that everybody begins to row in the same direction. It's important for your students' flourishing and for the flourishing of the institution, frankly, that these really exciting revisions that you all have decided in community to make together, that we get those really moving along and build on the work that's already happening here. And so after you have that workshop time, we'll come back together, we'll do a little sharing and thinking as a whole group, and see what next steps might make sense for you. So I am now going to share my screen. And well, first of all, let me ask, I'm just gonna look at Greg right now. Is my audio glitchy or is it working just fine? It seems people are saying we're just
Darby,
okay, right.
Your audio sounds perfect.
Okay, great. Okay, because Peter was a little bit glitchy in that first section, and so I don't know what that was, Peter, about your audio, but it was a little glitchy. We got it all. I actually love when there are little glitches, because you get this time when you get back to go to like the chipmunks, right? You guys know what I mean? Like somebody's talking along, and then there's that glitch, and then all of a sudden they're really fast like this, and so that's just kind of fun to me. But anyway, that's my own weird Zoom likings. So I'm going to share my screen right now, and gonna just show some slides. I'd rather speak to you in person, but I'm not there. So let's see if we can, now you just see what I just said. And I gotta wait for this one thing to go away. Here we go. Let me move this down. Let me go here. Let's see if I'm actually in this presentation. Nope, I'm not. Hold on a second. What do I have to do here? Okay, I am in the presentation, but it's not the view I want. You guys are just going to have to hang with me here while I need the view that shows me present. Here we go. Okay, are you seeing right now where it says present at the top and you see my little arrow? Let's see if this is going to work. Okay. Yes. Okay, we're here. All right. Very good. Okay, vocation redux, what, why, and how. So vocation, and for some of you, this is going to be largely review, but you know, it's been since January and the world has turned on its axis in some wild ways. So I think it might be, even if you've heard some of this before, maybe it will be a good refresher and not an insulting repetition. So vocation comes from the Latin vocare, which means to call, call upon, or summon. And until fairly recently, vocation has tended to be used, as Peter was mentioning in his intro comments, it's been used to refer either to a religious calling, such as a calling to the priesthood, or in its adjectival form, vocational, it often refers to technical training for trades like plumbing, construction, or auto repair. So either the rarefied life of the spiritually chosen or the blue-collar life of the non-elites. These days, at over 250 colleges and universities across the US, vocation has been redefined to mean something like a summons, call, or invitation to a life of meaning, purpose, and contribution. So this is a kind of all-encompassing definition of vocation. This is basically a combining of those two earlier meanings, because it includes both the ideal and the practical. So the language of vocation is no longer reserved for the spiritually elite or only the province of the working class. It's now for everybody. In this new phase of vocation thinking, one of these sort of iconic definitions is the one by Frederick Buechner, who wrote that vocation is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. Here again, we can see the bringing together of realms of existence that are often pulled apart. In this case, individual passion and the common good. Our individual desire for happiness and joy, co-defined by our genuine responsiveness to the needs and claims of the wider world. So when students are invited to use vocation as a lens through which to view their own lives and to understand their relationship to the wider world, we give them permission to foreground issues of meaning, purpose, identity, community, social responsibility, social justice as part of their own development and future. Not as things that they have to be working on along the sides of their college education, but as pursuits that are right in the primary frame. So for students whose lives are overdetermined by the market and whose life isn't, this permission, this focus is a gift. And it's a gift that we as educators, I think, have a responsibility to give to our students. So a focus on vocation extends to students a warm invitation to hit the pause button on their busy lives, to slow down, pull back, unplug, and reflect. Some of us on this call today may have had the luxury of experiencing a silver lining of COVID and of quarantining, in that it may have allowed us to hit a pause button in one way or another. I've heard from a lot of people that that's happened, that they've been able to slow down just a little bit, get a little bit of a different perspective, and reflect. And this is what vocation offers students, is a chance to take a deep breath and take stock and think at a whole life scale about where they are and what really matters and how and why they want to move forward. Now, this needs to happen in ways that fit the distinctive ethos of each college and the distinctive priorities and expertise and comfort levels of individual faculty members and staff. But in general, vocation programming is encouraging students to pause and to ask big questions. Questions about their own identity and lives, about the world they've been thrown into and are trying to understand, about love and desire, suffering and injustice, belonging and community. And students are also, in this kind of vocation world in higher ed, invited to pursue or nurture or cultivate worthy dreams, to imagine a future that they want to strive for, a life that they can be proud of, a world that's better than the one that our generation is handing them, the one that they've inherited. So the centering of vocation is a pause, an opportunity to pause, ask big questions, cultivate worthy dreams. It also includes opportunities for students to learn about and experience and experiment with possible futures. This could be, often this takes the shape of exposing students to diverse life stories and pathways, whether that's through literature or film, or zooming in different alumni or local folks into your, or not so local folks, it can be from anywhere these days, into your classroom so that students get exposure to different ways of being, because that kind of exposure inevitably reveals something that's actually a great relief for students to ponder and to hear, which is that very, very few lives unfold in an easy, linear trajectory. In fact, most vocation narratives feature major setbacks and failures, lots of meandering, plenty of unpredictability, surprise, and serendipity. And they feature progress as actually a process of fits and starts. So vocation stories are important to share with our students, and it can be our own story, but to give them multiple sort of lives to peek into. That's really important. Vocation stories often highlight the vital importance of role models, mentors, and help along the way, and the absolute necessity of a good sense of humor, of hope, and resilience. Vocation programs also explore possible futures through job shadow programs and internships, informational interviews, or through programs that bring the world of work into the classroom and give students a window onto diverse pathways, professions, and careers. One thing that we have here at Bates is a purposeful work infusion project, and what that is that faculty just dedicate one class period and one writing assignment to kind of helping their students imagine the world out there through the lens of that course. And so it usually means they're bringing in or Zooming or Skyping in one or more folks who can talk about, yep, I majored in English and here's what I'm doing now. And it just, again, opens the world, pries it open a little bit. One of the most important things that that vocation work and vocation programs can do is to expand students' sense of possibility about their own future. This is especially important for minoritized and underrepresented and first-gen students. And I know you have a lot of first-gen students at Colby-Sawyer. It's also important for any 18 to 22-year-olds because most of them have what's known as an identity foreclosed mindset, where they are most likely to choose the most obvious path for themselves, which means the path they've seen their parents or relatives take or that they've seen affirmed in the media. Identity foreclosure is making a decision about your direction without having explored adequately. And it challenges us as educators to make sure that meaningful opportunities for exploration are built into the student experience. Opportunities to try out interests and roles, to imagine themselves taking different possible pathways, to allow them to take low-risk forays into new territory, to fail, regroup, and try again. And again, the question for us today is how can I do some little piece of that in my own work? Another common feature of vocation programs is the effort to expand the network of adults who can serve as role models, mentors, and conduits to different fields of knowledge and work. So different ways of composing a life. I love that phrase. Some of you may be familiar with that. This idea of composing a life and being able to be exposed to adults who have composed different lives and had different experiences with that composing process. Super, super important. Vocation programs also usually include opportunities for students to develop skills that they can put to use during their college years. And we're all working on those in our teaching and in our advising. We're all educators trying to help students develop both the idea set, the knowledge base, and the skills and capacities. And we need them to use those during their college years, but also we're trying to convince them and prepare them for the fact that they're going to need them when they join the workforce after college and throughout their multifaceted lives. Finally, many of these programs give students meaningful opportunities to consider what and how they want to contribute to the world around them. So this kind of busy slide, on this busy slide, I've been talking in terms of vocation programs, but what I'm asking you to think about today is your potential slice of that pie. A course you do or might teach, your approach to advising. The idea here is that no single person will be able to focus on all the things depicted on this slide, but that as a community of educators, you'll create a patchwork of experiences and opportunities that amount to a robust developmental experience for Colby-Sawyer students. So what I'm asking you to consider today as individual educators is not so much what we might call a saturation model of vocation but instead an infusion model, not saturation, but infusion in terms of what we ourselves as individual educators are aiming for. So you don't need to devise courses or advising modules that are saturated with vocation, although a few of you may go in that direction, and that's awesome. You just need to think about an infusion of vocation into a course or an advising model. That could be a single reading or assignment, a unit within a course which offers an opportunity for students to dive deep for a moment, or a sprinkling of vocation throughout the term, just small doses periodically dispensed so as to create a cumulative impact. By the end of our time together today, I'm hoping you will have made a start on an infusion plan or strategy for an upcoming course you'll teach or an approach to advising that you'll try out in the coming year. But first, let's take a minute to consider why it makes sense to do this work. So what difference, if any, does a focus on vocation make for students? What do we know? What's the evidence? So early research on the impacts of undergraduate vocation programs shows really promising results. I think it surprised a lot of us. In a study that involved 26 campuses with vocation programs, sociologist Tim Clydesdale interviewed about 300 students, about 300 faculty and staff, analyzed thousands of survey responses, and conducted comparison interviews of students at 9 campuses that do not have vocation programs. His analysis revealed what he called remarkable and enduring effects on college students, on faculty and staff, and sometimes even on whole campuses. So in terms of student outcomes, Clydesdale conducted follow-up interviews with 123 recent college grads, both participants and non-participants in vocation programming, and he inquired into 6 areas of life: work or graduate school, finances, living arrangements, social life, love life, and spiritual life. The most dramatic result he found was that young alumni who had had quite different undergraduate experiences and were now pursuing quite different paths in life, but had all participated in some kind of vocation program during undergrad, exhibited what he called grounded idealism. Rather than becoming disillusioned and disappointed when their life plans changed or didn't work out, which is inevitable, and especially we think of last year's seniors, you know, what kind of crazy job market or non-job market have they graduated into, right? So his study showed that students who had participated in these vocation programs did not become disillusioned or disappointed when their life plans didn't work out or when they encountered obstacles or failures. Instead, these students made peace with setbacks and were able to chart revised courses toward long-term goals. Clydesdale also found that vocation participants expressed broader satisfaction with life after college than did non-participants, a statistically significant result that held firm even after controlling for gender, race, socioeconomic status, and other factors. According to Clydesdale, participants in vocation programs were not just semi-satisfied with their lives, they were broadly satisfied with them. They were, in short, flourishing. They were independent, responsible, broadly engaged, and pursuing positive life goals. Clydesdale concluded that vocation exploration produces a pattern of examined living and positive engagement with others, thereby increasing the odds that emerging adults will flourish after they graduate from college. So we have our definition of vocation as an invitation to a life of meaning and contribution. We have an early but extensive study of vocation programs that shows remarkable and enduring effects. And now the question is, how can we integrate this notion of vocation into our teaching and advising practices? And I guess the first thing to note is there's no one-size-fits-all solution. So you've got to figure out what makes sense to you in your courses, in your pedagogical approach or your advising approach, your philosophy. And you have to, and these days, your classroom context, whether you're hybrid, remote, in person. I actually don't know what your plans are here at Colby-Sawyer. I should have asked that, sorry. Peter, what are you guys doing? Can you unmute and tell me? Let me unmute you. Let's see.
Yes, Darby, we are going to have all the students back on campus, and they're going to be split effectively in half so that we can do some social distancing in the classroom. And the other half would view the class from a web stream, a webcam. And then in the following class, we switch spots for classes that need to be broken into smaller numbers.
Okay, yeah.
So the students are back, and it's sort of like a hybrid model,
Yep.
I guess.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah, we're doing some, calisthenics, gymnastics as well. And so, you know, I think we have to be thinking about these kinds of questions. In some ways, these questions about what does it all mean are more urgent, and they're more front of mind for students than ever. And so it makes more sense than ever to think about providing this kind of pause for this kind of work that we're talking about, but also to realize that as faculty, we're carrying heavier loads than ever. We're being asked to do more than ever. And so we shouldn't feel like doing this vocation work has to take over our minds or our courses or change everything we do. So you've got to figure out what makes sense to you and how it makes sense to incorporate some of this into your work. What I'm going to do in the next few minutes is provide some examples based on what I've seen work in my own teaching, advising, and also what's worked for other folks that I know. I co-lead a week-long faculty seminar every June in Chicago that's attended by a faculty member, or the 20 faculty members, each from a different NetView institution. I'll talk about NetView in a minute. Colby-Sawyer is a NetView institution. And so I've been doing that for the last 4 years. So I've gotten to know 100 different faculty members pretty well from 100 different institutions, all of whom are doing vocation work, whether they're biochemists or studio art professors or English or religious studies, whatever. And so I've been able to just see what they're doing as they leave this seminar. They're going back to their institutions and trying things out. So I'm just going to give some examples that I've picked up from them. And then I guess the idea here is to get your own pedagogical imagination moving. So if you see something you like, steal it. If you see something you think has potential, improve on it. If you don't see what you're looking for, create it. And some of these examples I shared last January and some are new. So here are some ideas to get us started. And I will say that when you have your workshop time, your 45 minutes later this morning, you will have access to all the slides I'm about to show because we're going to put a link to all of them in the chat so that you can take a look at them. So you don't have to, if you see an assignment that you really want to try, you don't have to jot it down right now if you don't want to, because you'll have access to it. So I think the first thing, the 30,000 foot thing to do is to think about developing a vocation vocabulary. And I already heard Peter using some language that maybe is going to be the Colby-Sawyer vocabulary. I don't know if it's the Peter White vocabulary right now, or if this is something that's kind of bubbling up. But he was using the language of vocation, purpose, passion. So those are parts of a possible vocation vocabulary or lexicon. Here are some other terms that are used at other schools. Where I taught for 16 years down in Jackson, Mississippi at Millsaps College before I came to Bates about 10 years ago, the word vocation was not going to work for us. We were, a tiny liberal arts college in the, on the buckle of the Bible Belt, surrounded by colleges that insisted that all faculty needed to teach Christian math, that kind of thing. And so the language of vocation just felt too Christian, too religious. It scared the bejesus out of a lot of faculty, frankly, at Millsaps. And so we were like, okay, that's not the language we're gonna use, because it didn't make sense in that context. So together we talked about other language that would make better sense. And we eventually we landed on meaningful work, lives of purpose and contribution, that kind of thing. So depending on where you are, different language is going to make better sense to you. And it's possible that where you are, vocation doesn't drip with the kind of Christian history that it did in the Deep South. And up here at Bates, the language of vocation doesn't. And so it's language that is quite possible to use without a lot of baggage. But one of the first things that you can do, both as a community of educators and as individuals, is figure out, how are you going to talk about this? How are you going to talk about vocation? It's, I think Colby-Sawyer has decided to use the term vocation, which is great, but then you've got to flesh that out. What does that mean? So that's one of the first things that you can do, is decide what is the language around vocation that makes sense for you. And you can do that as individuals, and you may be invited to do that as a more collective unit, depending on what Peter and Jen and Jean and other folks decide and what you decide collectively. What most schools, again, have done is just tried on different terms to see what resonates with their own sense of institutional identity and momentum. And then they've made a concerted effort to adopt this new lexicon. And I will tell you that students warm to consistency and coherence. So, you know, to have some phrases that they are hearing across classes and across co-curricular experiences can give them a sense that they're actually in the same conceptual universe and they're sharing that and they're a part of a shared pursuit. So it is important both to find what fits for you and to have some cross-cutting terminology. Let's see, I've got a quick chat I'm going to take a look at. Yep, good. Okay. Yep, finding purpose. Good. Okay, so next, some focusing on the FYE, the first year experience courses. So this would be moving from kind of that 30,000 foot to very specifically course-based context. I'm going to share a few assignments that various folks have used successfully in FYE courses and that might be interesting to try out exactly as they are or in some very different revised version. Since meaningful, let's see, I'm going to just do these one at a time, I think, and give us a chance to read each one just ourselves. I'm not going to read them to you, but the idea here is to focus on exploration first, exploration of self. So if you think about Frederick Buechner's iconic definition of vocation as the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep needs meet, we're never going to make vocation just this solipsistic, self-indulgent sort of things for students where it's all about your passion and let that just, you know, guide the universe. That's always going to have to be put into conversation and checked by these other, the broader world, the interests and needs and realities of the broader world. But there have to be at times within our work with students where we give them a chance to do some self-exploration and then also to do some world exploration and to bring those things together, recognizing they're never separable, but that teaching-wise, it makes sense to land somewhere, stay there for a little while, and then move to a different position. So the three examples I'm going to share right now are all designed to help students explore self and to kind of begin to ask the question of where does my deep gladness lie? What is it that makes me tick, that gives me hope, that brings beauty and meaning into my life, that enrages me in ways that activate the fullness of who I am as I try to participate in a world that I want to live in and that I want to bequeath to future generations. So I'm just going to go through these one at a time and you can read them. You can imagine your own texts that you might assign, just a short essay, and that you can invite students into engaging in ways that are self-exploration oriented. Another example. And a final example. So you get a feel for this. Those of you who are teaching, maybe focusing on not the FYE, but courses that might come later in the curriculum, again, just thinking about what would make sense as a moment to allow students to explore self, because they don't just need to do it their first semester, right? They need to this needs to become a habit of mind for them. So some examples focusing instead, okay, why didn't that go forward? Hang on. Not advancing. Okay, I am gonna really quickly, not sure, hang on, let's see if it'll work now. Okay, exploration of world. Here I've just got a few others and we'll just read them again. This is just to get your imagination moving. So here's an assignment that could lead into a research project or something more full, but it could also just stand alone, just getting students thinking about the broader world, thinking in terms of facts about the world, knowing that facts can be multiply interpreted and contested, etc., but that it's still an important starting point for those of us who want to be thinkers in the world. This third example, I think, is one of the most important things that we can have our first-year students do. But I've also seen faculty use it for juniors and have them, because especially in that first semester of the junior year, have them think about, as they're really starting to dig into their majors and their kind of deeper relationships to academic and paraprofessional fields, to have them have an opportunity to do this has worked really well. Again, great with first-year students. It helps, if you're going to do this assignment, to send out an email to all your colleagues to say, hey, just wanted to let you know, I'm asking my students to do this. You may get asked to do this. Feel free to say no, but just wanted to give you a heads up that you may get a request. And these are actually fun to participate in as a faculty member. All righty. So the next set of things that I want to share with you that are resources and that can be, I think, just a font of it's my favorite thought partner when I think about vocation, is something called the Network for Vocation in Undergraduate Education. It's shortened as NetView. And again, there are certain people at Colby-Sawyer who know all about NetView because they are the consortium of colleges and universities doing vocation work these days, those 250 colleges. Those are NetView institutions. Colby-Sawyer is a NetView institution. There have been, there was a grant that Colby-Sawyer wrote and successfully received that is providing some some funds for what we're doing today, as well as some incentives for faculty to do some course development. So that's NetView. And what they have is a website that is filled with resources. And when I need to think about something or be inspired around vocation, or I just need something fresh, I go to this website and just start noodling around. So they've got films and film reviews, lists of books and texts, webinar recordings, example syllabi. I will say that the syllabi, the ones they have up there, I looked at them again last night. For some reason, I think most of the faculty who are posting syllabi must be religious studies faculty, and so the syllabi are not representative of the kind of capacious nature of the thinking and of the disciplinary homes of the different people participating in this vocation work on different campuses. So I just want to want to give that. But then the best resource of all is this thing called the Vocation Matters blog, which is a NetView resource. And is anybody, I don't know if anybody already gets this, but you can sign up for it, you know, and you'll get a little email, I don't know, maybe once a week, maybe not that often. And often, you know, you just don't even have time to take a look at it, but sometimes you do. And this blog is the folks who are the contributing authors tend to be the graduates of this faculty seminar that I co-teach every summer. And so these are faculty, like that seminar is filled with faculty from all different disciplines. So you get this just rich set of contributions and voices around vocation in higher education. So a few of the recent posts, one was a post about Jane Austen, quarantining for COVID, and the cultivation of empathy. Another was a post about connecting vocation to social justice and Black Lives Matter activism. Another recent post shed some light on, and there's going to be a series of these that sort of unpack something that Augsburg College is doing. They've created vocation portfolios. So instead of e-portfolios, they're V-portfolios for all students to complete over the course of their 4 years. And they organize the portfolio around 5 metaphors: place, path, perspective or point of view, people, and story. And they're having different blog posts about each one of these different metaphors and what kinds of activities they're asking students to do and to put into their V portfolio. And they're having great fun with this. And even if Colby-Sawyer doesn't, and I assume it won't, you know, want to go down this same path sort of institutionally, there are tons of just, I think, learnings to be had from taking a look at what's happening at Augsburg. So I just encourage you to eventually, you know, bookmark at least the Vocation Matters blog or sign up for it, and consider NetView as one of your conversation partners. Your institution is a member, and you have, you know, all the rights and responsibilities that come from membership. Let's see, what do I have next? That's what I just did. Hang on. Okay, here we go. So moving into advising really quickly, as we think about using vocation as an organizing principle for advising, I think we want to frame the opportunity at the broadest possible level, but especially thinking about first and second year students like this. How can we help our students understand and experience college as their vocation, as a meaningful pursuit to which they feel genuinely invited or called, right? So we think of students as coming to college and sort of possibly being in spaces where they aren't already. So many of them, as we know, come with huge amounts of anxiety, uncertainty. All of them come with that to one degree or another, I think, because they've never lived in this little village, in this community before. So part of what we want to do with our advising is to think about how can we help this student feel genuinely summoned or called into college as their vocation right now, college as that space of meaningful work for them. How can we help our first-gen students, for example, dismantle the imposter syndrome that so many of them feel in a higher ed setting? We want students to see themselves as embedded within a web of resources and support, and to feel empowered to tap into those resources when needed or desired. That's what our advising, the most fundamental level, is about. And so, you know, a couple of resources there. One of my favorite exercises, I shared this in January, but it's still one of my favorite exercises. It's a mentoring map, and many of you may have used these kind of things before. This one is developed for students. It's something that students can build out during their first semester. It's not so much an assignment to be finished as it is an ongoing work that you and your advisees can return to again and again to reflect on what has changed or what might need attention. Are there areas where, you know, it's really not populated? Let's work on that, including this exercise in advising. sends the message to your advisees that they are not alone and that flourishing in college is a collective effort in relation to which they have important agency. So returning periodically with a student to their mentoring map reiterates this message, and it helps them develop the habit of looking for and serving as mentors, which is a habit with lifelong benefits. Another, oh good, Kathleen says that the mentoring map is part of the new advising blueprint. That's great. That's awesome. I love this exercise. I think I've shared it as an interactive thing with one of you here. So it's, you don't just have to print it out. You can, anyway, you can figure that out too. Another whole person advising exercise relates to goal setting. I also shared this last January, and maybe it's also part, I have no idea, no worries. But here, the content of the goals is less important than the opportunity to develop habits of goal setting, of intentionality, organization, reflection, and to help your advisee get the hang of goal setting, you can give them a template like this, maybe even with some examples. I find particularly around the academic one that often students, you say, what's your goal? And they'll either say to survive or to pass, which is just, you know, such a flat and disappointing goal, or they'll say to get all A's. And so either way, you're like, okay, let's unpack that a little bit. What would that look like? So here are some examples. Now you go figure out your own. I think it's also important to model for them that they should be setting goals around a whole person education. So it's not just academics, that you as their faculty advisor or their professional staff advisor are not only interested in their academic success, you're interested in their whole person development, and a tool like this sends that message. Another one, again, shared last year, but this is a really simple exercise. I use it at the end of the semester with my advisees. I have them think back on the semester, both their curricular experiences and their co-curricular experiences, and have them consider what skills and capacities they developed or deepened during that term, and which ones they want to work on in the coming semester. They can create their own list, or you can make a handout for them like this where they note which skills they want to work on. And you can ask about those at the end of the following term, or give them a simple writing assignment where they return to it. You can do it at the beginning of the semester. These are the ones, I'm circling the ones I want to work on. End of the semester, oh, interesting that I wanted to work on those because I did, or I didn't. I actually worked on these other ones instead. So this is the sort of exercise, along with the goal setting table and the mentoring map, that you can have students complete and bring with them to their advising appointment. And then a portion of your advising time can be dedicated to discussing any challenges or questions or concerns or affirmations that these exercises prompt for students. Great. Kathleen says we're going to be integrating a ton of this stuff. So that is awesome. So my vocation redux that I am winding up right now has tried to offer you a what, a why, and somehow. So now it is your turn to do some processing. And in just a minute, you're going to be beamed into breakout rooms in randomized groups of 4. So we're going to allow Zoom to just pop you into groups of 4. And your job while there is to do a quick round of introductions, to assign a note taker, and then to do a round robin discussion on these 2 questions, which I will put into the chat in just a minute. So what is one thing that resonates with you about vocation as a resource for your work as a teacher and or an advisor? If there's time in your breakout room, you could also go back and say, what's one thing that concerns you? Is there anything that you're worried about as you think about centering vocation in your work as a teacher or an advisor, or infusing it? And then the second question is anything sparking for you when it comes to the integration of vocation into your teaching or advising practice? I realize some of you have been just immersed in vocation learning and thinking, but I assume that most have not been, and some may just be kind of entering the conversation. And I'm hoping that wherever you are on that continuum, something is you know, maybe marinating for you and or sparking. And so what you want to do in these small groups is say, oh, you know, one thing I've been thinking about, or I'm wondering if I could do X or Y. Just start to let things spark in these small groups. So I want to take a quick look at the time. 9:55. Need to be, actually, we're right on time. Okay, this is perfect. We're right on time in terms of what I wanted to do, because I want to give you a little more time in the in these breakout rooms than we originally thought might be the case. So we're going to have some time for you to really do this. So let's see. In terms of number 2, let me just say a little bit more in terms of this second question. So the question is, did anything catch your attention this morning or in other thinking you've been doing about vocation? Does it get you excited or curious? Does it strike you as something you might be willing to think more about or even to try out? If you are a teaching faculty member, I want you to think especially about your courses. And if you're a LibEd course teacher, think about your LibEd course or courses. And really just spend some time there. So I'm gonna say that, let's see, it's 9:56. By the time we get in there and get going-ish, it'll be 10. And let's go, I'm just looking at my schedule. Sorry for just a second while I see where we need to be. All right, we need to be starting that at 10:45. Okay, yeah. So let's take a half an hour in these breakout rooms. His hand, a way to raise hand, and if you click on that, which Thomas Keeley just did, then I can see that he has his hand raised, and I can then call on him to share it with all of us. So thank you, Thomas, and I am going to happily ask you to go first, and then I'll go to Laura Sykes after that.
Sure. Well, thank you. I met with Beth, Karen, and Semra. We had a conversation. I think all of us were already bought into this idea, but we like the fact that the institution is generating a conversation around it so that all of us can also buy in and use more specific and inclusive language as we go forward. So one of the things, just picking out one thing that we thought about, was including more alumni in the conversation with our students, and possibly, and maybe this is going to Greg right now, possibly having alumni relations generate a database of graduates who are interested in talking about things like writing or data analytics or other aspects of their experience at Colby-Sawyer, so that they could zoom into our classes in the future and discuss that with our students. And that's the one thing I wanted to say.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. And I will just say, I know that question went to Greg, but I'm gonna pop in here with sort of executive privilege and say that at Bates, this has been actually a wonderful way to connect with alums. And so we've sort of put it out there, you know, that we're, you know, if you're ever interested in sharing a little tiny, you know, a bit of your story or visiting a class, you know, you have to manage expectations. We have to say we have no idea if there'll be a fit because we don't know, you know, what the demand on our end will be, but we'd love to know like who, and in particular, we've got faculty who are looking for this or that. And we've just had, you know, especially with our younger alums, this is a way they feel like they can contribute to the institution when they can't do a lot of monetary contributing yet. And so that's been really wonderful. Greg, I don't know if you want to respond in any way.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great idea. It's a segue I'd also share with Dan Parrish and his team, given that alums fall under his purview. But I love the idea. I love the way to connect our alums to this initiative, and it makes total sense.
Right, thank you. And Laura Sykes. And if anybody else has a question, just figure out how to raise your hand. And if you can't figure out how to raise your hand, in just a second, I'm going to let you just unmute and pop out with it. So Laura.
Sure. So in my group, folks talked about being excited about this work for the possibility of working with students, understanding that sometimes students come in and they think they're interested in a discipline, but they really don't know what the breadth of that is. How can they align their passion with how do I make money and what am I going to be interested in for the long haul? Sometimes they're coming to college because they're getting pressure from a parent, or this is the discipline that our family does. And so they might have an interest, but maybe not in the same ways. And so the opportunities to have those conversations and say, here are all the different avenues that you can get involved in this work, will be great conversations to have.
Yes. I think I shared last January, but I'll say it again in case I didn't. So there's your alumni base, and then there's also, we had down in Mississippi when I was at Millsaps, we had this series called Professing the Professions. And it would be especially easy to do now that so many people are used to Zooming and Skyping and things. But we would take a different sort of world of work, like the health professions, or sometimes, get even more narrow, physical therapy, whatever our area was. And we would invite in 3 or 4 local practitioners, and we would have a kind of a panel program, and we would design it for a particular course or a particular major that really had a lot of interest, but then we'd invite the whole campus and have a panel discussion. And you could do that virtually, obviously, even more easily than planning to do it in person. And we just had this series of questions that was, it involved both kind of big picture, like what got you interested in the first place? If you had to choose a shape to describe your path to where you are now, what shape would that be? That question in particular was always a relief to students, because nobody ever said a straight arrow from A to B. And students, like, they're just so worried about the shape of their future so often. And so we asked those kinds of questions. We also asked questions like, as you think back to your undergraduate self, what's one thing that you would say to yourself back then based on what you know now? And often it was things like, like doctors would say, or physicians, they'd always say, take a philosophy class, take a religious studies class. Don't only focus on the technicalities of what you think is coming. Get ready for the big questions. Get ready to be able to think nimbly or whatever. And so something like a professing the professions kind of model would be something to consider. And it could rely on alums, or it could include local folks. And that's a way also to just build rapport with some of your local partners, which is always something that we want our institutions to be doing. Jennifer Talkman, thank you. What can you share for us? Unmute yourself wherever you are.
Sure, yeah. So we actually had very similar conversation to what Laura was actually just describing about when a student, comes forth and their family said, okay, you're going to be this or you're going to be that, and that's the family's plan for the student, but may not necessarily be making the student happiest. So the piece that is sort of exciting is that through our advising, and I know we have an advising session later today, so that would be probably part of our conversation, but is the way that we can then discuss vocation and possibly, even if it's within that realm of industry or whatever, that help the student find happiness in there. There's so many different directions. One major, if a student's required to do that major by their family, that they could take within that and still find something that actually suits them. And ultimately, helping that student find happiness in the path that they're choosing versus just saying, I got to do this and my parents are paying. So that was kind of one direction we took that.
Nice, great. And I noticed that Courtney wondered in the chat whether Adventures in Learning is still running, because that could be a good resource. Does anybody know if Adventures in Learning is still? Yeah, Len, can you unmute and tell us? There you go.
Sorry. Yes, it is. And it is running both remotely and in person. Most of them are remote classes this semester. but a couple of the classes are in person on campus.
Terrific. And I don't know anything about that, but those of you who do will know that, okay, yes, it's still running. So that's a resource to be thinking about in relation to this conversation. Yeah, good. So I don't see any other hands raised. Does anybody want to, without the raised hand, I'm going to give anybody a second who, sometimes like I often am doing these things on my iPad or my phone and I just can't find the little things. So if anybody hasn't raised their hand but would like to jump in right now, I'm going to give you a chance to unmute and hop on in. All right. I was about to say Bueller. Anybody in my generation know what I'm referring to there? Yeah. So, okay. What we're going to do now is turn to our individual workshop work. And again, I want to challenge you to use this full time to do some vocation thinking and work. I realize how many other things we have pressing in on ourselves right now, but do your best to use it as a part of this retreat work. And what I am asking you to do is, first of all, if you know how to navigate to chat, I just put in our assignment for this individual work. And here it is. I would like you to spend from now until 11:30 giving one spark, something that has sparked for you around vocation. Give it some oxygen, see where it leads you. How could you integrate the concept of vocation into your teaching or advising this fall? More specifically, start with the big picture. How could a focus on vocation make sense within a course you'll be teaching or within your advising work? It's really important that you develop your logic that makes sense to you for why you're going to do this. It's not good enough to say, Peter White told me I should, right? You have to own this. You have to find a reason. And I'm just quite certain that you can find a reason that is true to you for why you want to do this. So you need to name it and claim it, why this is your work. This is something, the direction the institution is moving, and it's your work within that kind of shared direction. So find your why for doing this work. Develop your rationale for embracing vocation to one degree or another. And then what language of vocation right now is making sense to you? And in just a minute, we're going to put into the chat, Greg is going to put into the chat a link to the slides that I use, not all of them, but the ones that I thought would be helpful to you, and I can share the rest later. But one of those slides has the vocabulary and that I put up there. You'll have other stuff, but start thinking about your vocabulary. So that's the first thing I want you to do. And then move towards specifics. Think about how much space do you want vocation to take up in your class? Are you comfortable with, do you want it to be like a conversation, an ongoing conversation that you return to just at the beginning of class every other week for 15 minutes? Do you want it to be an ongoing series of free writes at the very end of class? Do you want it to be a single day? Do you want it to saturate? Like just think about space. And again, I realize I'm speaking with a primary focus on courses, but you do the transfer if your primary interest here is in advising. And then I want you to start fleshing out at least one idea for how you think you might infuse vocation into your course or your advising. If you have time, start mapping some things out, including what do you need to do this? What information do you need? What resources do you need? Which colleagues do you need to reach out to? What next steps do you need to have in place to keep your momentum going? So by 11:30, I'm hoping you will have done a little bit of your why, your individual why work, your language, what language of vocation is going to make sense to you, at least as you're thinking about it right now. And then how specifically could you move toward implementation? And what you're trying to do is put your own self on the hook for continuing this work after we're finished with today's time, right? So what do you need to have in place to put yourself on the hook to make this implementation happen? for you in at least one of your teaching or advising spaces. So what we're going to do now, so those things are in the chat. Peter, if you can also now put the URL in the chat to those, I mean, Greg, I'm sorry, Greg. There we go, from Greg. Those are the slides that you can access if you want to. I am going to stay in this main room. I'm going to turn off my video and I'm going to mute myself, but I'm going to be here. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat. I don't want to see you working, so if you know how to turn your video off, like, do it. Get to work. But maybe keep your, just keep an eye out, set an alarm or whatever. We're coming back at 11:30 and I hope to see all 60 of you back here at 11:30.
Darby,
Yes.
if I may, before everyone leaves, I guess I've been on the fence about if and when to say this, but since we talked about it in the last break, I'll just remind the faculty here that there are professional development funds and resources available for those that are going to propose some courses that include vocation or CEL components. And so as Darby, excuse me, puts you on the hook to think about these things, know that it doesn't have to be done in one day or even 1 week, that we have time and hopefully resources to help give you some support to continue the development. So while it's individual workshop time, if there's people that you think you might want to collaborate with, maybe you can send them a little note on the side and see what they're thinking about. Perhaps some of you already have done that. So hopefully that all translated well, Darby. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. So go off, do your own thing, chat me up if you want to. I'll be keeping an eye on chat. Okay, thank you. I don't know if you've ever used Padlet before. I will show it to you. And if you haven't, it might become a resource for you in the future. So what's going to happen is I have just put into the chat a link. And I would like for you to click on that link right now. And I'm hoping that it will take you to something that looks like a cork board. And you will see on that cork board down in the bottom right-hand corner a little pink plus sign, or you can just double click on the cork board anywhere and anonymously you can write anything you want and we'll all be able to see it in real time. So I'm going to try this out and I'm hoping that you can see my test. So I'm just going to look around to see some thumbs up in the screen to see if you guys are seeing what I'm hoping you're seeing. Okay, so what you're doing is clicking on that link, going to that place, and what I want you to do is what it says at the top of that corkboard, which is simply to share some initial idea or thoughts that you have for infusing vocation into your course. So this is just short. Nobody's going to know who's writing what you're writing, but you literally just double click there. You then write something, and then, yeah, there we go. You're starting to do it. And you can, it's okay if you just keep going. And we can just get a sense of what folks are thinking about. And if you're more interested in reading what other people are writing, that's fine. If you see one that resonates with you, you can put a little heart, you can heart it. You can say, oh yeah, good idea, or I plan to do that too, by hearting it. These are just great, just great. And when we're finished here, you can, if you just leave this open, if you don't close this down, you'll have this on your desktop so that you can return to some of these ideas that your colleagues are putting up here. Oh, somebody's only seeing a blank corkboard. Huh. Wonder if that's a lot of people. Most people seem to be participating. So I would just say to whoever, if you're just seeing a blank one, go back and click again. And I'm hoping it'll take you to the live one. We're not going to spend a ton of time here, so if it's not working for you, don't sweat it. And so what I want to do is just first of all, thank you for putting all these great ideas down. I realize you have lots more thoughts and ideas, but this is proof that you did some work in your workshop time, got to thinking, and also I just want to share this little technology with you because I think Padlet's kind of cool. And what I really like about it is if you are doing remote teaching in particular, you know, where students are on devices, it's a way to get some stuff that can start a conversation out there in an anonymous way, but that everybody can see at the same time. So just as we've just done, nobody has to worry about their spelling or anything because nobody knows who wrote anything. But it is a way to just get some stuff out there. And I apologize for the person who, and maybe there are more people for whom this did not really work. So as I'm looking, oops, what did I just do? There we go. As I'm looking at this and we're about to just have a little Q&A, I'm seeing lots of sort of small assignment type things and some ideas like I definitely want to bring guest speakers into my class. Somebody went into some real detail with some great even kind of guiding questions, you know, guiding words, motivation, aspiration, perspiration. I love perspiration. What if you sweat it out? That's really great. So I haven't had a chance to read all of these, but you can see we've got some that are going to take up more space in a class and some that are just going to be, you know, here's an assignment. Here's one day, here's one moment. And I'm hoping that you as a Colby-Sawyer College community will continue to welcome, we'll have a kind of a big tent or a capacious approach to this work around infusion so that there's not just one way of participating, but that people can come in and you know, what is infusion in one class is going to look really different in another class, so that students are experiencing these just multiple ways of engaging in this kind of pause for vocation. Because I think that is the way that you really do create a new culture on a campus, which is to have everybody in their own ways participating and buying in, right? So that there's not a one size fits all. And I know that in terms of especially your course development, what's being invited is what's going to work for you, what's going to serve your students, your teaching style, your course. And I know that with advising, that's the same sort of thing that's being welcomed. So let's leave the Padlet for now and just come back into the view where we're kind of seeing everybody in their Hollywood squares, if that's how you like to do it, or having the active speaker, but sort of fully back into Zoom. And again, if you don't close the Padlet down, You can go back to it, you can screenshot it, you can, do whatever you want to do to save some of those ideas if you want to. I guess the other thing that I'll say, just in terms of creating a culture of to do this work together around vocation, is just, and I think this goes without saying at Colby-Sawyer based on my experience here so far, but getting into this mode of just sharing, like sharing everything. Like if you have something that you try out that works for you, like let everybody know. Like maybe there should be a vocation diss list or something, I don't know, but just say, oh, I tried this with my students, I wasn't sure how it was going to work and it was so great. Or I tried this with my students, I was so excited and it was so bad. If anybody tries it and it works for you, let me know, because I'm not going to try it again unless I know it works for somebody else and I can figure out how to revise it. So just recognizing that this is collective work, and sharing what works and sharing ideas and being thought partners with each other and celebrating each other's efforts even when they fail. These are really important things to do to make this work move forward. And I think these are really important things to model for our students. It's the kind of world they want to live in and that we all want to live in. And if they see their faculty and their staff learning from each other and sharing with each other and being sort of active members of this vibrant thought partner community, they're gonna take note, and they're gonna want to emulate that in their own practice. So I just invite you to think about this vocation work as something you're doing for your students, but also something that can feed you and enliven and enrich your pedagogy or your advising. And then just share it with each other and learn from each other. So let's, in the time that we have left, which is not a lot, let's see what questions. Let's use the chat. The raise hand function again, because that's the easiest thing for me to see. So the questions that I have for you that you might consider bringing in to the whole room are, do you have questions? Did things come up as you spent your workshop time, things that you need answers to in order to move forward? These could be questions for Peter. They could be larger institutional questions that we might not have an answer to, but that are worth sharing and marking, and so that folks can get back to you with the answers. So what questions do you have? It could be just a question to the group. Is anybody thinking about X? Would anybody like to get together with me to think more about Y? I'd love to have a learning community where we do Z. Is anybody else interested? So it can be those kinds of offers as well. We're all in this right now in this shared space. Let's use it. Or it could be something that you landed on that you're excited about, that you may have written in the Padlet, but you're also still excited about it and you don't mind sharing in a more personalized way what you're excited about, or a way forward. And also then I welcome frustrations, concerns, worries. I've done a lot of thinking and living in this vocation space, and I want to say that it can be really complex philosophically and ethically. There are a lot of concerns about whether this whole conversation is the conversation of the privilege. So I guess I just want to say that pushback and hard questions are also welcome now. And I think you've got to also leave a space for this, that it's not all warm fuzzies. It's also, I'm worried about this for this reason. Who wants to think with me about this? Who wants to get into a space where we unsettle some things in order to ideally move into a way of doing this work that is really worth embracing and sharing and feeling good about. So Len, thank you. I would love to hear your thoughts.
Hi, Darby. I'm really glad about your last statement. I actually wrote down that I'm a little concerned about working with first-generation students who may be coming from a different socioeconomic class than we are, And when a student says, my mom, my dad wants me to go into nursing because it will be a safe, good job that will bring a solid education, that's a valuable statement. And I, who might come from a different class, should not maybe argue with that or try to convince a student of something different. So I was wondering if you could address that a little bit, because I do worry that we are coming from a higher social economic status than some of our students, and we are imposing some values that may not be appropriate for maybe a working class family or even a family that is poor.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Lynn, for elevating that concern. And I think I'll start with just two thoughts. One is that I think it is really important that we recognize that placing vocation within a context of sort of infinite choice is a category mistake, because we do not live, not all of us live in a world of infinite choice. That is a particular privileged way of positioning ourselves. And so I think, you know, what we don't want to do when we're helping students enter into these conversations is say, imagine that, you know, you're floating free from all connections to limitations and to accountabilities and everything else, and just who do you want to be and what, you know, when you grow up, and like that. That's actually not the conversation that we want to have with students, because it is premised on a kind of, you know, late global capitalist set of assumptions and some white supremacist and 1% set of assumptions. Let's just be really clear about that. So I think rather the space we're inviting students into is the space of putting a couple things there. Like think of Frederick Buechner's definition, right? Your deep gladness, the world's deep needs. Just asking students, when you hear your deep gladness, right? So some of them it's going to be, oh, being an investment banker and blah, blah, blah. But somebody else is going to be, you know, it's going to be, I hope to be able to help my mom buy a house.
Yeah.
Right? Like that would be the deepest gladness I can imagine. And frankly, that's a beautiful, right? That I mean, many of us would say that has more sort of moral merit than some other, and again, we don't play these games, we're not asked to weigh these things, but I think, you know, that our job again is not to impose a set of ambitions or even a framework of value or worth, but instead to think about the language and ask students to move into the language in ways that make sense for them. And yet, at the same time, to realize that many of our students have been invited into conversations and into opportunities to explore, and other students have not been. And so we should be inviting students into spaces of exploration, and then not judging when they want to rein it in or steer it in directions that we think, you know, might be something that we wish would look a little bit different. So we want to open the world up in certain ways without judgment and without a set of assumptions that, you know, your world should look like this, and certain notions of success should be what's really driving you, right? I don't know if you want to come back in, Lynn, because you're wise on this issue.
No, I think the way you spoke about it makes me feel less anxious, because my concern is that I bring a set of values that may be very different than my students. Doesn't mean my values are correct. It doesn't mean that my values should ever be imposed on them. And so, yeah, hearing you use the language of how to help students explore without putting value judgments on their thoughts is really important. So thank you.
Yeah. And I also think, you know, giving examples is important, and we may not, I may not be able to give the best examples, you know, to say to a student, so what I want to tell you is that your deep gladness is going to look different. It's going to be your deep gladness. It's not going to be mine. It's not going to be, and it may very well align with what your parents have always dreamed for you, and it may not. And that's hard work that you're going to have to do. And I want to journey with you as far as I can, but I want you to think about your mentor map and how many other co-travelers you have, and you know, folks who share more of your experiences, for example, than I do, who may join you in valuing things differently than somebody with my background might value them. And so, you know, you're just trying to open things up, right, Lynn? And yeah, and be as authentic as you can in articulating your own limits, right? I think exposing students to, like, especially, you know, that you have a lot of first-gen students at Colby-Sawyer, I know, and it's one of the things that I really admire, because it takes a lot of institutional commitment to do right by your student population. And so I think it would be very important to think about the texts, the exercises that you are doing, the texts you're assigning, like whose voice, whose experiences are being heard and elevated. When you're bringing folks in, zooming them in or bringing them into your classroom, who's coming, you know, and make sure that you've got folks, that you're not just doing this little shiny, you know, notion of a very narrow sense of success and which ways forward are valued, and leaving out others. And then always asking students, right, to do what they do so well because of partly because of their age, and Weaver wants them, which is to, you know, rage at the system. So what am I getting wrong? Whose voice is missing here? Whose value system, whose deep gladness is not being acknowledged? Bring it. We all can learn from that, right? And just to have that attitude, I think, goes a long way. So thanks, Lynn. Who else? Thoughts? A totally different approach to any of this? Who's got something that excites them or worries them? Who needs a question answered? We have 8 minutes, and I'll be patient. And if you don't know how to raise hand, if your machine doesn't let you do that or something, you can just unmute and speak into the Hollywood squares.
Darby, I've received a lot of the notes from the breakout sessions over the last half hour or so, and one of the themes that I saw was not totally dissimilar to Lynn's question, but it was about how do you separate vocation from profession for a student, and if they're passionate about something, does that necessarily translate into a vocation? So I saw that in multiple groups, so I don't know if you want to just expand a little bit more.
Yeah. So, you know, vocation is not the same as career and or profession. I think it's super important that we keep this really rich context for vocation, right? So what you do with, you know, what kind of work, stipendiary or not, that you choose to do can be part of the puzzle, but it's not the whole thing. Like, you may say, you know, my deep gladness is in mathematics. Like, there's just nothing that makes me happier. Or my deep gladness is, you know, what really, really, really warms my heart is, you know, just having an opportunity to experience kindness with another human being, and or whatever, or to provide for my family, whatever it is. And so those are not reducible to career. And so you guys cannot reduce this to career. Like, you can't do it. This is not, you remember when I first showed the two kind of traditional ways of thinking about vocation, and one is the spiritual elite, that, you know, we're called to serve God, and only a few of us, and we're all male and propertied and white and whatever it is, right? The old ways, right? So that's not what we're talking about. And neither are we talking about just reducing this to job. We're talking about something that brings those things together, that happens somewhere with a Buddhist middle path in the middle of those two things. But it has to do with, and again, this is the student, you have to let the students figure out what this looks like for them, but you can say for yourself, you know, for me, this has meant thinking about a life well lived, right? We're talking about composing a life. We're not talking about just finding a career, composing a life. How does your career trajectory, which I know many of you are totally worried about, how could that, what shape would that need to take in order to fit into this picture of composing a life that you also have in mind, right? And what we're doing more than anything, I think, with vocation and offering these moments of pause to reflect and explore is we're helping students develop habits of self-awareness, world awareness or awareness of other, and helping them develop the habit of ongoing reflection. If we can do those things, self-awareness, attunement to the needs and the wounds and the possibilities of the world, and habits of reflection, we're equipping them with some really amazing tools for purposeful living and for grabbing what joy one can grab in the world. And so I really think this is less about any, don't let it become instrumentalized. And even as you're realizing, we have some very, very specific things that are going to help students, like setting goals and thinking about job and next steps. Those are really important. Just don't reduce it to those. Yep. Kirsten, is that how you say the name? Kirsten, you're next.
Coming in.
Yeah.
So just to finish, one of the things I really struggle with is the lack of passion I feel our students have. So when we ask them what are they passionate about, like, how do we build that? Like, they're not walking around our beautiful campus in masses. They're not painting the sidewalks. They're on their devices. And so I think being on your phone or being on your computer, I wouldn't want that to be one's passion. So how do we build passion or something that they feel deeply about, as you've been saying?
I think it's a great question. I think it's a question to pose to them. And, to just say, what do you think? Like, what pisses you off? The way to get to passion often is not like, what do you love? What do you warm to? But, what makes you sweat, right? Somebody in the Padlet who talked about perspiration. And sometimes, just developmentally, we have to realize where they are and where they're not. And so sometimes what makes them sweat is it's public speaking. Right. Okay. Well, so what can you learn about that? Or how can you, is that something that you want to continue to have make you sweat? And if not, what can you do? So I think you're right about the devices, but I also feel like when you get students talking together about their addiction and our addiction to devices and the ways that it minimizes and reduces the complexity of the universe, and the possibilities for growth, I find that they can very ably enter into that conversation and get self-critical about that. But I also think that these young people, and I would just say, I think we're all just over-determined by, market definitions of what it means to be human, to put it one way. There are lots of better ways, I'm sure you all would put it. But I think challenging folks to sort of say, okay, what are the expectations for you that you feel like are being kind of put upon you, or that you've grown up within and haven't even begun to notice, like helping them just become self-aware about the things that are defining them, and then saying, how do you feel about that? Like, is that a good fit for you? What would it mean? Like, how do you get in touch with your emotions? I do at the beginning of every class, I do what I didn't do today, but I did do in January when we were together. But we spend a few minutes just breathing together, grounding in. I ask people, let's ground in, and everybody knows, feet on the floor, comfortable position, eyes on a neutral point or eyes closed, and we breathe together for 3 minutes. And that quiets some of the noise. It stills the mind a little bit, especially as it becomes a habit. I actually start every meeting that way. with my staff. You know, I think those kinds of habits that just help, like that model for students, but draw them into the opportunities to center. I think those are really important, and they're cumulative over time. So I think it's both the tables that we explicitly set for students and the questions that we pose, and we say, you know, if you don't know what you're passionate about, that's actually okay, because at your age especially, your lives, you've been like over-defined by externalities. And part of what I'm inviting you into this semester or this day, this hour, is to try to figure out, you know, where's the you in the middle of all of that? And it's going to be a co-defined you. There's no such thing as this isolated, solipsistic, heroic self, right? Back to kind of Len's point about connections to and accountabilities and responsibilities and ways we've been defined in both liberating and disfiguring ways, right? By externalities. So just the chance to start wading through all that, like that's what the pause for vocation gives us freedom to do, is invite students into those kind of spaces. So we're at time, it's 12:01. I want to say to everybody, thank you so much for spending the morning with me and with each other. And tomorrow we will gather from 1 until 3:30. We're going to hop right in at 1. Our topic tomorrow is community engaged learning. Super complex. It's the space I live every day of my life in these days. So I just love it. I'm so excited to be with you tomorrow. I hope you'll come back. I'm going to stay on this line for just a few minutes. And so if anybody wants to stay in the room and have a quick conversation with me, I welcome that. Put stuff in the chat. But I hope to see you all back tomorrow. Thank you. Sorry to have gone 1 minute over.
No, Darby, thank you for a wonderful session.